I've seen a lot of different ClickUp setups, and generally this is the number one most made mistake, is not understanding what each level is really for and its capabilities before building your setup. This is the most important but least talked about part of ClickUp. If you're new to ClickUp or if you're using it and you're just not getting the benefits of it, this video is for you, exactly for you. I want you to learn what I had to go through years of pain to learn so that you don't have to suffer. This is going to be part one of multiple parts because there's a lot to unpack here. So let's get started. So every level of ClickUp, that's your spaces, your folders, and your lists, they all have to have a purpose, okay? We have to take a step back and think about the uses for each of these levels before we just jump in and build it. Spaces are the highest level of your hierarchy, right? It goes spaces, folders, and lists, what does this mean? What does it mean? It basically just means that your space can summarize all of your folders and lists that you put within it. Right? So what's a use case for this? Let's take client work, for example. So if we use spaces, individual spaces for each of our clients, right? Like client A is a space, client B is a space, client C is a space, we lose the option to then summarize all of our client work in one place. Now, there is a small caveat, sidebar, there is something called the everything view where you technically could use a location list folder to summarize all of your client spaces, but this is not, it's kind of a waste of time. I'll explain a bit more as we go through the series. So if instead you then choose to use a space called client work and then folders for each client, and then within each of those folders, you have lists to separate out your types of work. Then at the client work space level, we have the option to look at all of our client work, all of our client projects, all of our client tasks in one place, right? That really helps to get a better handle on your project management, because it's not very helpful if we're trying to manage timelines or predict timelines in an isolation, right? We have client A's project over here in its own little space, and client B is also in its own space, and we don't see how they interact because we have to do the work, right? We're the person who's going to be doing the work. So it's important for us when we're planning to see how those timelines kind of stack up so we can move a project out if we've got too much going on, or kind of just plan more effectively. And so we lose that option if we're going to use spaces for individual clients. So you can see how that can be applied to really any type of work when you're building out your business in ClickUp, is that spaces should be used as a way to summarize a certain type of work and get a better high-level bird's eye view of that work. And client work is the best example along the same line. So we figure out our spaces, how are we going to organize them with that new mindset? Within that, then how are we using folders and lists, right? So the main benefit of a folder is that it is a container for our lists, right? But why do we use different lists? This is an important one because I see this a lot where it actually doesn't make a difference or make any sense to use separate lists. So what's a use case for using separate lists? Well, there are two main benefits to having different lists. And the first one is that having a different list can allow you to customize the columns within it, right? So again, it's best done through an example, which is my content creation folder. And then I have a list for emails, videos, and blogs. And the reason that I have these different lists for each of those three different types of content is because I'm now using different columns for each of them. So in my video list, I have a YouTube link column, or custom field rather. It's a column and a custom field. Whereas in emails, I have something called subject line, right? Like those two things, you don't require a subject line for a YouTube video, and you don't require a YouTube video link for an email. So it just gives you even more abilities to customize the way that you work. The other use case for lists and different lists is when you're looking at your time tracking reports. So in your time tracking reports, you have the ability to set up different levels, 2 different filter levels. So you could have space and folder, or you could have folder and list. So having different lists, if I had my, coming back to the email, blog, video example, when I track time under videos or emails, then I have in my time tracking reports this really clear understanding of how much time I'm spending on emails versus how much time I'm spending on videos, which may not seem important, but when you start to like really grow your company, which is inevitable for all of us as we become more organized, it becomes important to know where your time is being spent so that you can understand if it's the best place for you to spend your time, right? If you're looking, you're like, oh my God, I'm spending like 40 hours on emails. Like, how can I, recoup some of that time so I can be spending it on videos, which I'm actually better at doing, right? So it gives you the option to have these conversations with yourself about as your business is growing about where your time is being spent. And that is clear because we're using lists to kind of categorize the time tracking. So to summarize that, we use lists or different lists for two reasons. One, because we can completely customize the custom fields and the columns that we have within it to really make it work for us. And two, because we then have better and more clear time tracking reports when things are organized by list. So to summarize, when we create our spaces, we need to come into it and think about what can I create a singular view of that I didn't used to have a singular view of so I can improve how I plan and how I work. Two, how am I going to use folders? What are they going to separate out? And three, what am I using separate lists for within those folders or even outside of folders? But what am I using these lists for? What are the use cases? How am I going to customize the different views? Is that going to be a reason that I have a separate list? And what benefits am I going to gain from having clearer time tracking if I'm going to separate out my time tracking reports into different categories using lists? So that's one of the most important things about ClickUp. Honestly, that is such a foundational piece that if you overlook that, then you totally miss out on the incredible project management capabilities that it has, and just not really understand why everybody's into it. So this is part one. On part two, I want to talk about project management and how we're going to use that space level to really up level our project management capabilities by looking at everything in one view and how we can separate out that information so it's super helpful and not overwhelming at all. So tune in next week for part two of this video series, and I will see you then. In the meantime, if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, I send out weekly tips just like this and little insights to guide you on your organizational journey. Okay, I'll see you later. Mwah.